Much. You began by saying you were going to lower the tone and depress the mood, so I suppose it falls to me to raise the mood. So let me, before I do anything else, invite you all to have another sip of this extraordinary sparkling wine, which is grown very close to where I live in Hampshire and wins absolutely every blind taste, to the fury of champagne makers in France all over the world. This Coates and Seeley is the only foreign wine served at the Georges V Hotel in Paris. Not the only English wine, the only foreign wine. Right? That's how good it is. So do enjoy it. And this allows me to give you my only official joke of the evening, which is that you are only allowed to call it repartee if it is from the Repartee region of France. Otherwise, it's only sparkling wit. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's start. Let me take you back to September 1939. I see my Kiwi friend Shane Frith, so I might as well take this as any other example. The Labour Prime Minister of New Zealand, Michael Joseph Savage, is in hospital, seriously ill, and within hours of hearing the declaration of war, he makes a broadcast in which he says, "With gratitude for the past, and with confidence in the future, we range ourselves without hesitation alongside Great Britain. Where she goes, we go. Where she stands, we stand." And he said that in absolute confidence that it would be a sentiment shared across his country, regardless of party affiliation. That is the kind of reflexive closeness that comes not just from ties of habit and history, ties of culture and kinship, ties of language and law, but that comes from being shaped by similar institutions that teach us to respond to the same challenges in similar ways. When I was a member of the European Parliament, I was often asked, why are you so, you Brits, why are you so non-European in your thinking? Why are you so in with all these other Anglo-Saxon powers? Don't you understand that your future is with your neighbours? You've become a US aircraft carrier moored off Europe. And as patiently and politely as I could, I would explain that drawing on this shared heritage, going back through the Bill of Rights, back even before the Great Charter, to the folk right of Anglo-Saxon common law, we were habituated and we were taught by our institutions to think of the world in a particular way. And part of what set us apart was our readiness to deploy proportionate force in defence of freedom, because we bridled at injustice, we disliked bullying, and we believed that the elevation of the individual above the collective was a worthy goal and one, in the end, worth defending. And none of that is any less true in 2025 than it was then. We still have the same institutional ties, the same emotional ties, but I wouldn't want you to think that CANZUK is only about sentiment or nostalgia. I mean, yes, of course, we owe an immense debt, in this country particularly, to our closest friends who came and stood by us in the great conflagrations of the 20th century. But that alone doesn't make the case for a closer union today. What makes the case for a closer union today is the interoperability of our systems that makes us a natural market as well as a natural political and strategic bloc. We have the same accountancy systems. We have the same, our professionals are not just trained with the same syllabus, they're very often trained in the same institutions and at the same places. So there is an ability that you have, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or an architect, to work anywhere in those realms without needing to do any reskilling at all. And that's something that even after half a century in the EU, we never really had with our neighbours. So why now? Well, some of us, as Elliot and David were saying, have been pushing this cause for some years. Andrew, you have for a very long time. But I think things have changed very abruptly in the last couple of months. We're coming up to an election in Canada at some point in the next 2 or 3 months. The Liberal Party, as well as the Conservative Party in Canada, is now pro-CANZUK since Carney took over as Prime Minister. And in fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the NDP is also pro-CANZUK by polling day. Because of course they are. I mean, why wouldn't you be if you were a Canadian politician, right? What conceivable downside is there? I'm not sure, we're all familiar with what's been happening between the US and Canada. I'm not sure that we have registered the extent to which something similar is about to happen between the US and Australia. The US and Australia have a free trade agreement. And the Australians wrote into it a guarantee that there would be no tariffs on their steel or aluminium exports, even in the name of national security. Right? In other words, they wrote into that treaty, in the clearest language their lawyers could devise, a guarantee against the US doing what it has just done vis-a-vis Canada. Right? And yet, it was announced yesterday that the US still intends to apply its steel and aluminium tariffs on Australia, in flagrant contravention of the treaty. Now, I'm sorry to say this is almost certainly going to boost the Australian left in the same way that Trump has boosted the Canadian left. Right? The Canadian Tories were almost unbeatable before the annexation threats and the tariffs. Trump has an ability to boost left-wing parties all over the world, including in his own country, I'm sorry to say. But it does, of course, also open the door to a closer CANZUK relationship. And I can very well see those countries coming together in an economic configuration that goes much deeper than the one we currently have. It is true we all have trade deals with each other. We're all members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. We have to call it the Comprehensive and Progressive to humour Justin Trudeau. Now that Justin Trudeau is off the scene, we can come up with a better name for it, I hope. But we can go much further. And as I understand it, the basic cause when it comes to commerce of CANZUK is that we should start from the proposition of absolute reciprocity. If something is legal in one of the CANZUK realms, it is automatically legal in the other three, and that applies to goods, to services, and to professional qualifications. By all means, have a mechanism to ask for temporary or particular exemptions if there is some very special case, but your starting point should be one of complete reciprocity. By the way, this is what Australia and New Zealand do with each other. The Australian-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement is the most ambitious and most efficient and most prosperity generating on the planet. So one way of thinking of the trade aspect of CANZUK is that we are simply quadrilateralizing what Australia and New Zealand already do one with another. Up until now, that hasn't been possible. We had an attempt to deepen our trade talks with Canada under the last government. Actually, Kemi was the trade secretary, and it founded on protectionism on both sides. Canadian protectionism over dairy, very old and familiar story. British protectionism over beef, and an unwillingness to move away from EU standards on beef, because for some reason we've decided that it's an absolutely critical national interest of ours to reserve our beef market for French and Irish exporters. We don't come near to supplying it ourselves, but for some reason we don't want to allow competition from non-EU states. But we also have to think about the defence and strategic component of CANZUK. Now, again, as David correctly says and as Elliot just said, it's already there in many ways. We have a proximity on defence and strategic issues that is extraordinary among sovereign countries. Any CANZUK subject can serve in our special forces, and that is an extraordinary thing that we take for granted. It's highly unusual. But let's just think about how the world will look when, following a long lead time, we are bringing on stream the kind of long-term projects that we're commissioning now. I'm thinking above all of nuclear capacity. We have, everyone knows, we're a nuclear power here, and we have autonomy in how we use our nuclear weapons, but we don't control the spare parts. We don't control the storage. For us to move to the level of autonomy in nuclear weapons technology that, say, the French have, would be by far the biggest item of our defence budget. And we have to make a decision now about whether we can rely on other people 30 or 40 years from now. That's the kind of lead time that we're talking about when it comes to nuclear weapons. So let's ask the question, on whom are we certain that we can rely in the 2050s and 2060s? And the world may be unrecognizable in many ways by then. Right? I like to think we'd be able to rely on the US, but I can't say for sure after the last few months. I like to think we'd be able to work with our democratic allies in Western Europe, but again, who can say that with confidence? The only thing we can say with absolute confidence is we can give the Michael Joseph Savage reply, right? We know that the only countries with whom it is unthinkable that we would have a dispute are the other CANZUK allies. And if we're therefore serious about developing any kind of autonomy in the military and strategic space, that is where we begin. And I'm not talking only of nuclear weapons, but of advanced satellites and heavy lift capacity and all the other things that so far we have not bothered with, because we always assumed that in a big war we'd be part of a US-led coalition. All of these are CANZUK opportunities. Final point. There is a big anniversary next year. 1926 was the year of the Westminster Conference. It was the beginning of the transformation of the British Empire into a voluntary Commonwealth. By the way, a process that I don't think gets anything like the recognition it deserves. No other empire that I can think of in all of human history had that self-dissolving and democratic quality, that it was able to transform itself peacefully in almost every case, a few tragic exceptions, but in almost every case, peacefully into a voluntary club. Well, if we are now marking that centenary, isn't this an opportunity for the king to invite the prime ministers of his larger realms and make that the moment when they can launch a closer association among our four countries? By then, I can't see how we have any alternative to having a Labour Prime Minister, whether it's Keir Starmer or someone else. But there is a world in which all the others are right-of-centre CANZUK enthusiasts. Peter Dutton in Australia, Christopher Luxon in New Zealand, and inshallah, Pierre Poilievre in Canada. And isn't that a terrific opportunity? Wouldn't that be a splendid way of marking the anniversary in a way that is in keeping with the temper of our people, and that makes the point that a nation links its past to its future, that what makes us a nation is having a collective memory, that a nation that forgets its history has lost its identity as surely as somebody who has the tragedy of suffering from dementia, but that it is from that memory that we carve out our future, that we do it in accordance with our own instincts and our own laws and our own institutions. Together, we are not just the greatest force for freedom and democracy, but we are the greatest force for world peace and stability. Our song is not yet sung. We're just getting started.